When things go wrong as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to smile but you have to sigh, when care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must but do not ever quit. Success is a failure turned inside out. Let's talk and clear the clouds of doubt.
Bismillah, assalamu alaikum, peace be with you. Welcome to today's episode of Let's Talk. I'm your host, Omar Dunlap, and today we're discussing a very important topic with a very special guest. The format of today's show will be a little different because we have such a special guest with us. We're talking about jihad, war, what does Islam say about peace? This is the general topic we will be discussing today, inshallah ta'ala. But before we get into that, I would like to introduce and welcome our guest, Dr. Jamal Badawi. I think you don't need any introduction. Everyone knows who you are. You're a professor emeritus at St. Mary's University, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, very well. But you're a very well-known personality, so you hardly need any introduction. But I would like to welcome you to the show and tell you assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And I would like to also welcome our studio audience. Assalamu alaikum. I think it's appropriate to just get right into the questions. So what I will ask you is, it's argued since September 11th that Islam is peace. This is something Muslims say, and many non-Muslims have supported us in that. But how do we rectify this with the fact that there are Muslims there's so much bloodshed in the Muslim world amongst Muslims versus Muslims, Muslims versus non-Muslims? How do we deal with that issue?
Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. All praise is due to Allah, the sole creator, sustainer and cherisher of the universe. And may His peace and blessing be upon His last prophet and messenger, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, upon all the prophets who preceded him, and upon all those who follow their rightly guided path until the Day of Judgment. I wish first of all to greet you all with the greeting of Islam, which is the greeting of all of the Prophet. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, which means may the peace, blessings and mercy of Allah be with you all. And before I answer the first question from Brother Omar, I'd like to express my gratitude after gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to all my beloved brothers and administration of the Huda channel, which is contributing a great deal to provide or promote better understanding of Islam. First of all, on the first question about Islam and Islam's essence being peace vis-a-vis what is happening among some categories of Muslims. I must say that the biggest confusion arises when we equate the term Islam with Muslim. Muslims are human beings. Even if they believe in Islam, they still have their shortcomings as human beings. They err, they make mistakes. Some are terrible mistakes. And that applies to all other faith communities as well. Islam is the normative teaching of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed through His Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, either in a verbatim form, that is the Quran, or in revelation in meaning, that is in the sound sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. To equate both is a travesty. In fact, to equate Islam with Muslims is to imply that whatever any Muslim does or claim to be Islamic must be Islamic, so the criterion of truth is what Muslims are doing, right or wrong. That is the reverse logic. Islam is the normative teaching, the acid test, the criterion by which the actions of those who claim to be Muslims can be evaluated. I think this is a major issue of confusion. But since we're talking about normative teaching on the question that you raised, then we can answer that on more than one level. First of all, how does the term Islam itself reflect its fundamental and core peace orientation? The word Islam comes from a root in Arabic composed of the three letters Sin, Lam, Mim. It may sound roughly in English like SLM. And without understanding the root meaning, one cannot understand any derivative from that meaning. And that applies to various key terminologies in Islam, and inshallah some of them might unfold as we move on in this segment, and Allah willing, the next segment. The root meaning of these three letters, SLM or Sin Lam Mim, actually is peace, submission, and purity. If I were to put that together and humbly propose a comprehensive definition of Islam, Islam basically is to achieve the purity as much as any human can achieve spiritual purity by achieving peace with the Creator, attain inner peace within oneself, and peace with all the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In a way, you can say also, Islam in essence is the striving to attain inner peace through being at peace with God. If a person is not at peace with the Creator, it is very difficult to have a real and sustained inner peace within oneself. And peace with Allah is based on believing in Him, knowing Him, loving Him, and seeking His pleasures. That is the essence of all. If indeed a person is striving towards that objective, he or she will be truly and deeply at peace with himself or herself. That peace can manifest itself also in peace with all the creation of Allah, with human beings, whether they are Muslims or people of other faith communities, at all levels, whether on the family, peace within the family, whether it is peace within a given community, nation, ummah, the community of believers, of Muslims, and the world at large with all its populations. It is peace also with the world of animals, and we find 14 centuries before in hadith literature as well as in the Quran how to coexist also with the animal world that Allah has created for our benefit. It is peace with vegetation, and we'll find that as we go on, even in case of war, if necessary, that one is not supposed to destroy fruitful trees. Not only this, peace with inanimate objects. Most amazingly, when the Prophet ﷺ passes by the mountain of Uhud, and he says, this is a mountain that we love and He loves us. How do you love the mountain? Sometimes I say, do you go up the top of the mountain and embrace and smush it, kisses right and left? That we appreciate and love the creation of Allah, even inanimate object, the respect and use of resources like what? This is all in our heritage that goes back to the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Yes. It is in that sense then that Islam is the very, very broad concept of peace, again with the Creator, with human beings, animals, vegetation, the universe that Allah created for our purpose. So when Muslims say that the essence of Islam is peace, it's not an empty claim. It is not a post 9/11 kind of thing to make Islam look good. It is something that's much deeper than that, that goes back to the time of revelation of the Quran and the Sunnah to the Prophet ﷺ. Muslims are to be evaluated according to that standard.
Well, very well, and that of course is what most Muslims, I hope, would be their standard answer. But some still will argue that the problem is not with Muslims as fallible human beings. Mm-hmm. They will say that the problem is with Islam itself or with the Quran itself. For example, they say there's a doctrine of holy war or something like that. So why is war a part of Islam?
For those who claim that there is a concept or term like holy war in the Quran, I make an offer that I made for several years, and there were no single taker. I would be willing to pay 1 million Egyptian pounds, dollars, euros, sterling. You choose your currency. For anyone who shows me a single place in the entire Quran from A to Z where the Arabic equivalent of the term holy war appear once. If you find it twice, it's 2 million. In whatever currency you want. Once. Let us remember, first of all, that the Quran was not revealed in English. The Quran is revealed in pure Arabic language. And for anyone who knows Arabic and English, you know that if you translate holy war into Arabic, what is it? Harb Muqaddasa. You've got 1 million if you find it once in the entire Quran. I'm not familiar even with any hadith or saying of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam when that term equivalent to holy war has been used even once. That's one thing. But the issue doesn't stop at that. A lot of people are not aware of the nuances of the use of terms in various languages and the history and circumstances in which this term was introduced. You go to English dictionaries and you know what holy war is defined? A war waged on behalf of one religion against the other religion. Notice here, war waged on behalf of one religion against the other religion, which implies that the only reason one group is fighting the other is that they think that the religion is superior, the other is inferior, the religion is right, the other is false, and that in itself justify fighting and killing other people. When did this term emerge? In the Dark Ages. I don't like the term medieval. The Dark Ages, as even some European historian called it. When a group of Christians forgot the noble teaching of another great prophet, not only prophet of Christians, prophets of Muslims, prophet of Allah, Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, deviated from that, and for other agendas, economic, fanatical, or whatever, waged war against Muslims whom they consider to be infidels, and ask even Western historians about the amount of bloodshed they did to Muslims. The same thing was called holy war, even by the leaders of the religious institution at that time. That was holy war. But the same term has been used also when the so-called Crusades descended into a level even of fighting among Christians themselves, contrary to the teaching of Christ, in the name again of falsity or falsehood in some interpretation of Christianity or the other. That kind of thinking, that kind of historical background and meaning attached to holy war is terribly negative, and it's contrary to the teaching of all prophets. And as such, it has nothing to do really with the teaching of Islam.
Let me stop you right there for just 1 second. We're going to take a quick break and we'll come back and finish that point, inshallah. So don't go anywhere. You're watching Let's Talk.
Inshallah, on the straight path, we would like to discuss the niqab from an Islamic and social political perspective.
So sometimes some non-Muslims, they might not understand the full Islamic pictures. Anyone can say anything about it.
Yes.
So when can we, who speaks for Islam? This is the biggest question. Who speaks for Islam? No, they are not sinning. They are not sinning, but we are talking about now the general ruling. They are not sinning, but they are going against what has been established. It is his own ijtihad at a specific time.
People would see it as
threat.
A threat.
Exactly.
How do we explain to them it's not really a threat? It's actually good for the country as well. But if we don't participate, how would we ever reach to our rights? Can you clarify with us what should be the level of political participation of the Muslims in the West?
Yeah.
Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you. Welcome back to today's episode of Let's Talk. We're discussing a very important topic, which is jihad, holy war, terrorism. What does Islam have to say about all that? We have with us in the studio Dr. Jamal Badawi, and I want to get right into the next question. We were talking about jihad and is a holy war in the Quran and all of that. So what I want to ask is, even if holy war is not in the Quran, as you've said, isn't the concept there?
There is no connection whatsoever between holy war as we defined before and the noble concept of jihad. There's no connection. First of all, we go back to basics. What is the term jihad as an Arabic term? What is the root from which the term has been derived? Just like we emphasized the term Islam, here is another term, very crucial one. The root from which jihad came, JHD or Jim Ha Dal in Arabic, actually literally mean to strive for something or to exert maximum effort. Say jahada, from juhd, exertion of maximum effort. In that broad sense, I would bet that each and every human being, Muslim or a person from other faith communities, any human being, is involved in jihad every day, day in and day out. When somebody wakes up in the morning in winter when it's really cold and the bed is so soft and warm, but he's got to get out to go to work or school, that is jihad. Striving and exerting effort to pull yourself out of that bed, especially if you're allergic to morning, like some people don't like to wake early. That's jihad. If a student is working on his or her term paper, Muslim or non-Muslim, it is jihad. Exertion of maximum effort to get a good grade. The same thing of striving. To plant a tree and to water a tree for the purpose of preserving the environment, you're actually doing jihad. You're exerting effort for a given cause. This applies, as I said, to Muslims and non-Muslims alike. But when we come to jihad in the Sharia meaning, in the Islamic, as an Islamic term, it cannot be really just a broad term jihad, but it has to be qualified. Jihadun fi sabilillah, to exert or strive in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means that it has to be controlled, guided, and guided by the teaching of Allah. That's why we don't just say jihad fi sabilillah, in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, if we go back to the usage of that term in the Quran and Sunnah, or the Hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we find that it is used in a whole variety of meanings. And unfortunately, people only focus or think or equate jihad only with one meaning. From the text of the Quran, there is jihad against evil within oneself, exertion of effort, striving to purify one's soul. Look, for example, at the concluding two verses or ayat in Surah Al-Hajj, the 22nd surah in the Quran, where a derivative of Jim Hadal, something that relates to jihad, is mentioned. And look at the context. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اركعوا واسجدوا واعبدوا ربكم وافعلوا الخير لعلكم تفلحون وجاهدوا في الله حق جهاده. It's asked Muslims to strive in Allah in the best way. But before that, what is the context? Prostrating, bowing down, meaning in worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to worship Allah, to do righteous deeds, so that you may attain success. So obviously the context here is not a context of a battlefield. This is what is known in Arabic as jihadun nafs, to strive against evil. And actually this type of jihad is fundamental. It is even a foundation for any other form of jihad, because unless we have victory over the negative inclination in our human nature, we can never fulfill jihad in any other form. Secondly, the Quran calls striving to reveal the truth, exerting effort to clarify the true nature of the Quranic teaching as a form of jihad. In Surah 25, in Ayah 52, it commands the Prophet ﷺ in his struggle against those who reject the existence of Allah or reject faith. And what does it say? فَلَا تُطِعِ الْكَافِرِينَ وَجَاهِدْهُمْ بِهِ أي بالقرآن جهادا كبيرا. Don't obey those who reject faith and make jihad against them. With what? With bihi, bil-Quran. The Quran is a tool of jihad. If jihad means violence, what does it mean to fight with the Quran? Get a a hard copy and hit people in the head? Obviously has nothing to, meaning here, jihad with the content and truth in the Quran. In Arabic literature, it's quite common that somebody is making jihad with his pen and jihad with their tongue. And that was mentioned also in one of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ as a legitimate form. So revealing truth is a form of jihad. Thirdly, the Quran describes also something related to social jihad, social justice, payment of the poor due, zakah. And Surah 49 describes, for example, or praises those who make jihad in the way of Allah with their persons and their property. So the payment of zakah is jihad. And it has the same root meaning, right? We said jihad is to strive. In that case, zakah is jihad or striving against miserliness, lack of concern for people who are in need when Allah has bestowed so much upon us. That's a form, legitimate form of jihad. There is also political jihad. When the Prophet ﷺ said that one of the best forms of jihad is to say the word of truth in the face of an unjust ruler. Not unviolent. To say a word of truth itself is a form of jihad because there is risk to the life even of the person who stands for truth. There is also intellectual jihad. One of the most important mechanism in juridical interpretation in Islam is called ijtihad. Ijtihad. It comes from the exact root from which jihad, which means a scholar exerting maximum effort and striving to provide an answer to a contemporary issue that's not explicitly covered in the two main sources of Islam, the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, by exerting intellectual effort to understand the maqasid, the objectives of Sharia, and so on, so as to be able to give an answer that is well-founded. It may not be, infallible, but something that's founded on the Quran and Sunnah. That's a legitimate form of jihad. Some women were complaining to the Prophet ﷺ that they wanted to participate in jihad. He said to them, "Jihadukunna hajj." Hajj is your jihad, because women are not required, even though they did sometimes help, that they're not required to go and defend the community. Yes, there is another form of jihad, a very important one, relevant one, which you can call it combative jihad. That is jihad in the battlefield. A lot of Muslims even mix up between two Quranic terms, jihad and qital, and they focus only on qital. As it has been shown already, jihad is a much broader concept, very broad concept that deals with variety of aspects and levels in human pursuit and life. But the other term that is normally used, even though it still qualifies for the term jihad, when we talk about combative jihad, actually, more specifically, it's called qital. Qital, which means literally fighting, the closest term close to the notion or concept of war as such. But even then, that type of jihad is not a carte blanche that you can do anything because for any cause. It is controlled by the text of the Quran itself. And in fact, the two major causes, some people try to reduce them to one or elaborate, but in essence, really, that a Muslim is not allowed to carry arms and wage war against others, except in one of two cases. If there is a third one, please bring it, and we'll discuss it. You find that in Surah Al-Baqarah, the second surah in the Quran, from ayah 190 to 194. One is a bona fide self-defense against unprovoked aggression. وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. Translate, fight, yes, in the way of Allah, not for empire building or personal benefit. Fight in the way of Allah. Those who fight against you. That means defending yourself against those who attack you. But then it says, وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا. تَعْتَدُوا could be translated as commit aggression, or it could also literally mean exceed the limit. Adwan means to exceed the limit or proportionality absolutely necessary to defend yourself against aggression. The second cause is given in the same section. Okay? وَقَاتِلُوهُمْ حَتَّى لَا تَكُونَ فِتْنَةً. Fight them. Here, historically, it refers to the idolatrous Arabs who are trying to suppress Muslims, so that there would be no more fitna. Fitna here, in that context, means persecution. وَيَكُونَ الدِّينُ لِلَّهِ. That they fight against persecution or severe injustice done to you. And even that ayah came much later than the first ayat revealed in the Quran, that for the first time gave Muslims the right to defend themselves after 13 years of patience and forbearing with persecution in Mecca. According to scholars, the first such text in the Quran appear in Surah Al-Hajj in the 39th and 40th ayah. أُذِنَ لِلَّذِينَ يُقَاتَلُونَ بِأَنَّهُمْ ظُلِمُوا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى نَصْرِهِمْ لَقَدِيرٌ. Permission has been given, after all that years of patience, for those who are what? يُقَاتَلُون. In Arabic it's known, who are being fought against, that indeed they have been wronged and that Allah is able to give them victory. I couldn't find a third cause in the Quran, and any ayah that anybody quotes outside of its historical context and textual context, that is the context of the whole of the Quran, let him or her bring it forth. Inshallah, we try to explain. But there is no other causes besides that. But even then, the conduct of fighting or combat itself has been very, very strictly regulated, because the ethics of the Muslim does not depart even in the combative jihad.
Well, that was a very encompassing answer. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back, so don't go anywhere. And you're watching Let's Talk.
Labbaik Allahumma labbaik.
Hajj in the Quran. Hajj is the fifth pillar of Islam and one of the most important acts of worship for Muslims.
The journey of Hajj is a clear practice to the believers, so that they come back from the journey of Hajj with the pillar of Islam being perfected. Almost every place on the face of earth, every corner of the world, you would have a representative of that place coming to Hajj. From the east and the west and from north and south, every single race you would find in the journey of Hajj. Nothing would be pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unless we follow the way of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam in every major and minor thing, from all corner of the world. And this is the sign that everybody's coming for the same cause, for the same purpose. They are united, going to Hajj for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the first place of worship, the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Mecca, blessed and guidance to all mankind and all that exists. Complete the Hajj and the Umrah. Lillah, meaning for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone.
Join Sheikh Ibrahim Zidan as he examines the meaning, wisdom, and essence of Hajj by examining its relevance in the Quran.
Huda, a light in every home.
Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Let's Talk. Today we're discussing jihad and war and peace and all of those really provocative topics. Before we get back into the show, we asked a group of people on the street a question. We asked them, how do you define terrorism? And we're going to take a look at what they had to say.
Opinion, how would you define the word terrorism?
Fury, just chaos. A group or person who directs their hatred into a kind of a mass attack, like a mass murder, causing harm, basically, causing harm to someone else, just to further their own goals, you know.
Well, my understanding of terrorism is that it's when a guerrilla organization, so not a government, military, performs acts which seek to like cause disarray and disorder, not a complete sort of fatal blow to a sort of country, and by doing that to sort of get government to yield to their will as opposed to defeating them.
Terrorism, brother, we Muslim are all the world are blaming us. We are terrorists. Yeah, Islam, Muslims are terrorists, but I don't think so. The real Muslim. I'm in London.
How do you define terrorism?
I think terrorism, the people who are killing himself or other people, I don't think so they are Muslim. I don't think. Personally, in my view, Muslims are harmless. They will never think to make harm to other one. Yeah, because Islam is a deen of peace. Yeah, and I don't think so that I will kill any other non-Muslim because he is not Muslim. No, because everyone have right in Islam. Everyone have right to live in. Yeah, according to the perfect rules of religions. And if we compare the religions, other religion with Islam, the Islam is the best, of course. There is no concept in Islam related to terrorism. No concept.
Bismillah. Well, that was very interesting hearing those answers. Before we get to our audience, I want to ask you a relevant question. Some people do commit acts of terrorism and they will call it jihad. So can we distinguish between legitimate jihad and terrorism?
As there is no connection whatsoever between holy war and jihad, there is no connection whatsoever between terrorism and jihad. You see, the problem lies again with definitions. And definition is not just lexical meaning, but also the common connotated meaning, especially in a given circumstances or age where we're living. Terrorism is, as a term, has been debated very hotly, and so far, to my knowledge, there has been no internationally accepted comprehensive definition of terrorism. And there is a good reason behind that. Some countries are resisting any broader and comprehensive form of terrorism so as to save themselves from some of their actions that may qualify under a more fair and comprehensive terrorism. The term terrorism also has been used as a pretext to attack countries, commit aggression against them, commit untold kind of injustice to people in the name of fighting terrorism which might be a disguise actually for other economic or political kind of objectives. In several debates that I have been, not debates, I should say dialogues, that I have been involved in North America with the people of other faith communities, particularly people of the book. I suggested humbly a definition, and many of them found it very interesting because these were sensible people, were not politically driven by hate or political ambitions of countries or the other. And my humble definition, and I stand corrected, that terrorism is any act that is aimed at hurting or harming the innocents, whether the victim or the culprit is an individual, an organization, or a state. Let me repeat that and tell me if that's a self-serving definition only for Muslims, or is it fair enough? Any act that intends deliberately or carelessly to harm innocent people, whether the victim or the culprit is an individual, an organization, or a state. In fact, state terrorism might be even more devastating than individual or organizational terrorism, because states do have immense assets. The attack on the Freedom Flotilla, for example, and so on, and the use of devastating arms, the destruction of Palestinian homes, the bulldozing of their homes, the killing of their children, and all this untold, almost bordering genocide cannot be excluded because it doesn't fall within one definition that some commission is having as a definition of terrorism. As defined, it has absolutely nothing to do with Islam. Because even when you talk about jihad, combative jihad, there are regulations before the battle, during the battle, and after the battle. Before the battle, anything or any involvement in combative jihad must be based on the reasons that we mentioned earlier, either self-defense or resistance of gross injustice like occupation and so on. There could be no other objective. Secondly, as the Prophet ﷺ explained, it is not jihad when you go for the sake of booty, the war prizes. It is not jihad when you go for personal reputation or fanaticism. Asabiyya, it can translate today like extreme blind nationalism, my country, right or wrong, but only for the sake of Allah, so that the word of Allah being supreme, mean not to impose Islam on others, but mean the word of Allah guiding us about the limits of jihad must be strictly involved. The Prophet ﷺ showed that even if the enemy is intransigent and unwilling to stop their aggression or injustice, even before the battle begins, he commanded that the leader of the Muslim army should make a final appeal to the other before the battle begins, that they should arrive at a just peace, which means to the last minute, trying to avoid confrontation and bloodshed, because that's not an objective at all in Islam. During the battle, the ethics, as I indicated in the previous question, the ethics of the Muslim does not say, all right, it is war, man, you can do anything. No. Even in war, a Muslim is obligated to follow the ethics of Islam. And this is nothing new. The Prophet ﷺ said that you cannot hurt what we call today non-combatants. He spoke about women who are not fighting, children, old people, even clergy of other religions, like monks who are focusing their attention on their religious functions, or even young people, asifan, meaning ajiran, people who are simply hired to do work. They're not carrying arms, going around their lives. You're not supposed, that's what we call in modern terms non-combatants. He said you cannot kill animals even except as needed for food. You cannot uproot fruitful trees. You cannot destroy what we call in modern terms the infrastructure of the country, like poisoning wells and so on, because you're really punishing the whole population rather than targeting. So these are all regulation, and if I may add just one quick thing, even after the battle or during the battle, there is a command in the Quran that if the enemy who is intransigent is inclined to peace, you should also be inclined to peace. وَإِن جَنَحُوا لِلسَّلْمِ فَاجْنَحْ لَهَا. Not only this, the ultimate of nobility in the battlefield, that while Muslims are fighting and have to defend their lives, if one of those fighting against them seek refuge in the Muslim, he should give him refuge. وَإِنْ أَحَدٌ مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ اسْتَجَارَكَ فَأَجِرْهُ حَتَّى يَسْمَعَ كَلَامَ اللَّهِ. You find that in Surah 9, that if one of the mushriks, because these were the ones fighting the Prophet ﷺ at the time, seek refuge in you, give them refuge. Why? So that he may hear the term, the word of Allah. Maybe the hearing of the term of the Quran might counter the false propaganda that might have caused that hatred to fight against Muslims. They have also their own media at the time, also that's destructive. Which shows, as I normally quote or make a statement, the true spirit of Islam is that a Muslim fighter defending his country, his dignity, his rights, is not interested in cutting as many heads as possible, but in winning as many hearts as possible. And then it's summa ablughu ma mana, that even if the person doesn't accept Islam, that's his right, no problem. Take him to a safe place. What more nobility can you find? And then the prisoners of war cannot be abused. In fact, the Quran gives ideally one of two things. فَإِمَّا مَنًّا بَعْدُ وَإِمَّا فِدَاءً حَتَّى تَضَعَ الْحَرْبُ أَوْزَارَهَا. Either you release some of those prisoners as an act of charity, if it doesn't affect your security, maybe winning their hearts, or fida'an is not exactly ransom, because ransom might have a specific meaning in the minds of people. Fida'an means that you could, for example, be exchanged for other prisoners or for financial compensation because of the damage caused to Muslim by aggressive wars or occupation. My question here is this: what did the Geneva Conventions, the Fourth Convention on War, the humanitarian international laws about war, what did these 19th century laws add to what the Prophet of Islam taught 14 centuries ago in a world that was like a big jungle. So to connect in any way, shape or form between the concept of terrorism and jihad is just again ما بين المشرق والمغرب. It's like the far east and far west can never really be the same.
Well, we have just about a minute and a half, so I want to get a quick question and a quick answer from our audience. Go ahead.
Doctor, some people claim that Islamic history was full of blood. Is it true? And how can we differentiate between Islamic empire and terrorist acts?
I don't think it's true. It's exaggerated. However, I go back to the first question that was answered earlier, that we cannot equate Islam and Muslims. Even if it were true, is it the fault of Islam or the fault of some Muslims who did not abide by some rules in some degree or the other? But the problem, of course, in evaluating Muslim history is that some people go to one extreme by claiming it was all bloody history. Look at how many Khalifas were killed and all of that. Other people are so defensive that they say, no, Islamic history, try to justify wrongs done by Muslims. We don't have to justify wrong done by Muslims. We have to evaluate what they did in the light of what agrees with the Quran and Sunnah. I think the moderate way would be to say that, yes, there have been conflict. There have been some cases where there were unnecessary situations of bloodshed and fitan, but that's the reflection of the weakness of human nature, not the weakness of Islam. So we should not totally denigrate our history or romanticize it as if Muslims commit or cannot do no wrong. But comparatively speaking, and it's not a testimony from a Muslim, many of the Western historians said it quite openly, that the world has never seen people, they use the term conqueror, and I have reservation on that. Fath actually is not conquer. Anyway, anyone who is, any group that has been more merciful and more just than, they use the term Arabs, but they refer actually to Muslims, Arabs and non-Arabs. Comparatively speaking. So us in history, Muslim history, how many cases there of so-called genocide? That is for sure that we really have definitive information as the genocide done by other people who claim to have followed other religions. Religions are not responsible for that. It is the action of people that to be condemned.
Very well. Well, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back, hopefully with more questions from our audience, inshallah. So don't go anywhere. You're watching Let's Talk.
Reviewing the second rule of al-mim as-sakinah. That is the letter mim. So if the first mim is non-vowel or sakina followed by a voweled mim, so I will merge the first in the letter and I will pronounce them as one. وَآمَنَهُمْ مِنْ. And we spoke abundantly on the virtues of seeking refuge with Allah from the outcast Satan. Especially for the first reciter, he's got to recite it out loud.
وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الْبُرُوجِ.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
فإذا جاءت الصاخة.
وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ.
Make sure it's Dhamma. وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ. Thank you for joining us.
Bismillah. Welcome back to Let's Talk. Today we're discussing the issue of violence and terrorism in Islam and what does Islam have to say about all of that. Our special guest is Dr. Jamal Badawi. Dr. Jamal, before we go any further, I want to ask you another question myself. If jihad is so restricted, as you've answered in a previous question, how would we answer those who quote, for example, Surah At-Tawbah, very famous verse there, kill them wherever you find them, this sort of verse? How would you answer that?
To understand any verse in the Quran, one must keep in mind a number of things. One is the historical context. Historical context is not exactly like the reasons of revelation or asbab al-nuzul, but it's very close to that. The historical context, the occasion of revelation in terms of its technical meaning, but also most importantly, the textual context. What do we mean by textual context? That one cannot pick one ayah in the Quran here and there and base a theory on that. That's what I call the cut and paste approach. Anyone with moderate intelligence can use the cut and paste approach to prove anything from anywhere. What does that translate? It translates in that when we talk about or deal with an issue like women, Sharia rights, peace and war and all of that, we don't just pick and choose, cherry pick. We have to bring all the verses in the Quran that deal with the same topic and understand them in their proper, broader context. This is a rule that the scholar called Al-Qur'an yufassiru ba'duhu ba'dan. Quran explains itself. What is covered in one place may be misunderstood unless you relate it to others. But also in the West, there's a very serious problem also of translations. Let me apply these basic rules, sensible rules of exegesis to the ayah that you refer to, that's ayah 5 in Surah 9 in the Quran. First of all, contrary to the propaganda that we hear in North America and Europe, that this ayah applies to fighting Jews and Christians. It has nothing to do with Jews and Christians. It says, فَاقْتُلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ. And the word mushrikeen as a title was never given in the Quran from A to Z as a title to Jews or Christians. They are called people of the book. In fact, Surah 98 in the Quran, Al-Bayyinah, classified all those who are الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, those who rejected Islam, into two groups, even though they're both rejectors of Islam. مِنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ وَالْمُشْرِكِينَ, of the people of the book and the mushrikeen. And the word mushrikeen here actually is used to refer to the idolatrous Arabs, especially if we connect it with the occasion of this surah, Surah 9 and Surah 8 and similar surahs that deal with the struggle for Muslims to survive in the face of the attacks against them by the idolaters. First of all, it's mushrikeen. Number two, what is the historical context? Killing them because they are mushriks? No. People caught even in the middle of the verse. You're talking about people who betrayed their treaty, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which called for peaceful coexistence for 10 years, by killing innocent people who presume that they have a peace treaty, cold bloodedly. That's what we call today war criminals that cannot escape the punishment. So that referred to those in the battlefield who betrayed their treaty and killed innocent people. But does it say kill all the mushrikeen? Again, that's wrong. If you look not just in one part of a verse, like some people quote part of a verse or even one full verse, if you take the whole 14, 15 verses in Surah 9, you find evidence of the reason why the Muslims were allowed to fight them. First, لا يرقبون في مؤمن إلا ولا ذمة. They never observe in dealing with the believers, with Muslims, neither relationship, kinship, or dhimma. And dhimma is known to be treaty. Here is an allusion to the treaty because they broke a peace treaty and killed innocent people. Not only this, the ayah shows that the aggression began from them, not from Muslims. وَهُمْ بَدَأُوكُمْ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. They started the aggression against you in the first place. But more importantly, it doesn't apply to all mushriks in Mecca, because the same section make an exception. In one place it says, except for those mushriks who made the treaty with you near the sacred house. In another it says, except for the mushriks, even mushriks in Arabia, who did not betray their treaty. فَمَا اسْتَقَامُوا لَكُمْ فَاسْتَقِيمُوا لَهُمْ. So long as they observe their part of the deal or the treaty, also you observe your part of the treaty. We have to realize that there is a very important rule that many people forget, which is known al-'am alladhi yuradu bihi al-khas. Sometimes a general term that sounds inclusive in the Quran may not necessarily refer to everyone, but only to a subset, not to everyone. I'll give you a very simple example. I don't want to make the answer too long, but just one simple example that anyone can relate to. The word an-nas in Arabic, what does it mean?
Mankind, people.
Humankind, exactly. There are places where the general term is very inclusive, no doubt. When Allah says He is the Lord of an-nas, Rabb an-nas, there is no other Lord but Allah, which means it includes all human beings from Adam until the Day of Judgment. But then in the Quran we find the case of a story of some people who came to the Prophet ﷺ in Medina to warn him, actually one person in particular, to warn him that the idolatrous Arabs are raising an army to fight him. And if you read in the Quran, الَّذِينَ قَالَ لهم الناس إن الناس قد جمعوا لكم. Here they refer the same term, identical term, الناس. It would be totally uncalled for to say that the Quran speaks about all human beings from Adam until the day of judgment will gathering to fight Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in a specific time or place. So that means it is a general term, but there is evidence here to show that it applies to some. And the same thing applies when you use the term mushrikeen. The same term when the Quran speaks about people of the book, the wrong they did, the right they did, it does not necessarily mean each and every one of them. One has to put it into its proper context.
Right. Well, I want to leave some time to get to a question from the audience, so if I'll give you this question very quickly, and if we could get a brief answer. Surah At-Tawbah, this verse we just mentioned, ayat number 5, is not the only verse about war in the Quran. People will claim that there's other verses about war that have same or similar meaning. Is there a contextual issue with those verses as well?
Absolutely. They're all the same. If we study them carefully. But the problem here is especially with some Western scholarship, not quite scholarship, sometimes it's more propagandist than scholarly. Some are scholars, some are propagandists. Is that if they simply quote the Quran out of the historical context without bothering to know what was the history of Islam, what kind of threats face that community, then they go in all kind of wrong directions. Take for example, فَإِذَا لَقِيتُمُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَضَرْبَ الرِّقَابِ. They say if you take it just in isolation, whenever you meet those who rejected faith, strike their heads off. Is it talking about anyone that you're walking in the street peacefully? Or is it speaking about the context of battlefield where, as we mentioned earlier, Muslims are defending their own existence? Some people say, okay, but the Quran says, وَقَاتِلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ كَافَّةً. And they quote only half of the verse, by the way. Fight against the unbeliever, all of them. Actually, this is not a correct one. As Mufassirin said, if you read the rest of the ayah, it says, وَقَاتِلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ كَافَّةً كَمَا يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ كَافَّةً. Means, as Muslims, you should all be united. كَافَّة أي مجتمعين. You should all be united as believers in fighting against the mushrikeen, not any mushrik, because those are fighting you also united. This is a very fair type of equation. There is no question at all. If we just care to study, to have scholarship, not just to quote from here and there for propaganda purposes. If we really put all the verses together, you find there is no single ayah in the Quran that I know of that says you can fight people because of difference in religion. In fact, you can fight a Muslim even who is of the same religion if they're committing aggression, as we find in Surah Al-Hujurat, the 49th surah, which says basically if two groups of believers fight one another, try to make peace with them. If one of them aggress against the other, you all fight in spite of unity of faith. So there is no fighting based on faith whatsoever.
Okay. Right. Well, let's take a question from the audience real quick. Does anybody have a question?
No.
Go ahead, brother.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
A lot of non-Muslims, they try to use the Quran, verses from the Quran, specific verses from the Quran, to criticize Islam. One of those verses being the verse where it talks about Muslims should not have relationships, certain types of relationships with non-Muslims. Could you elaborate a little bit on that as far as the contextual and the historical basis of that, and explain it a little bit more so as something that we can use actually to explain to the non-Muslims?
I think they're probably referring to some verses in Surah Al-Ma'idah, I believe. It's the 32nd ayah, and similar verses in the Quran. There are a lot of problems with this kind of insinuation they do. Number one, that the ayah here is to be translated awliya, not asdiqa. The ayah did not say, don't take Jews and Christians as asdiqa. It said awliya. And there's a big difference, because in Arabic there is asdiqa, if Allah wanted to convey that message to us. And awliya, even though the term wilaya has variety of meaning, but in that context actually meaning people on whom you have alliance for your own personal defense. Even if you stop at that, that's legitimate. Or everybody does that. Every people of the same religion have to be united first and take their, or depend for their defense on people who share their faith. Even that, there is no problem with it. There is evidence right from the Quran that you can take them for friends. not instead of believers, in addition to your Muslim relationship. Let me ask you this question. Which relationship normatively is more intimate and more close? Relationship with a friend or with a wife? I know some spouses might be at each other's throat, but I'm talking normatively speaking. Marital relationship is very close, mithaqan ghalidhan, a very solemn covenant. And according to the Quran, in Surah 5, in Ayah 5, in Ma'idah, even though we don't encourage it, but it's permissible, nobody can say it's haram, it's permitted for a Muslim male to marry a woman of the people of the book. What is the obligation of a husband toward his wife? The Quran answered that in Surah 30, Surah Al-Rum, in Ayah 21. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. So the mawaddah, which is a stronger form even than mere the term love and compassion. Now, with this, then the Muslim would be loving even, not just having friendship, loving his wife, not for her rejection of Islam. So this is an evidence. Thirdly, there is a very key ayah in the Quran. I'll finish with that. I know the answer might have exceeded the expectation of the producers, but it has to be clarified. A very, very key ayah in the Quran that provides the norm of relationship between Muslims and people of other faith who are peacefully and justly coexisting with them. The surah number is 60, Mumtahina, and the ayah is number 8. لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين. It says basically in translation, meaning Allah does not forbid you or restrain you, O Muslims, with respect to those, one, who did not fight you because of your religion or drive you out of your homes. Remember what we said about the second surah? Aggression, oppression. The Quran is very consistent. What do you do with them? That you should deal with them in justice and kindness. Allah loves those who do just. In fact, the word justice and kindness do not reflect, these two terms do not reflect the depth of meaning of the original words in Arabic. Tabarruhum is not just kindness. Tabarruhum is come from the same root relating to birr, which is our obligation toward our parents, which is not only kindness, but respect and love. Not love for their kufr, they're not believer. Love for them. This is not haram at all.
I think that's a very interesting point, but we're really up against the end of the show. So inshallah we'll continue it next time, inshallah. So we plan to do some more shows continuing from here, so be sure and watch. Until then, I'm your moderator, Omar Dunlap, wishing you peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to smile but you have to sigh, when care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but do not ever quit. Success is a failure turned inside out. Let's talk and clear the clouds of doubt. Success is a failure turned inside out. Let's talk and clear the clouds of doubt.